What's up, guys? Welcome into today's episode where we talk about, is recruiting going to be what ultimately costs Shane Beamer his job? Locked on Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked on Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked on Gamecocks. It's great to have you along. I'm Chris Marler. Thank you for making Locked on Gamecocks your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Game Time app. Make sure you download the Game Time app, create an account, use Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. That is all. Let's jump into the show. We are joined by a very special guest, a new dad as well. Jake Crain from Crain & Co. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing great. First off, congrats on this. I hope South Carolina fans realize how lucky they are to have you. And you know, I know you're going to do a heck of a job. But yeah, man, wife's about 14 weeks in. You know, I kind of been looking at this pregnancy like the NCAA tournament. Like we're now like we just made the Sweet 16. Really excited about it. Found out that it's going to be a girl. So now I get to go buy another gun and just hope that it looks like her.
All right, that was not a part of any of my script that I had put over here in my Google Doc, but I love that. We're talking about guns and Gamecocks already. Honestly, that might just be the hashtag for the show. Listen, so I wanted to bring you on because, one, you do phenomenal work, obviously, and you have your finger on the pulse of most things college football. But specifically today, South Carolina makes I don't know if it's a splashy hire. From the reaction that I saw on social media, especially with Gamecock fans, it felt like a splashy hire. But someone that you know personally, Darren Uscher, is hired, former Gamecock alumni. He's hired as the director of player personnel and recruiting. Now, listen, I'm just gonna be honest with you. One of the main reasons I brought you on here, and I try to be as authentic as possible, and our listeners, I'm gonna be upfront with you. I don't understand what this job was until Jake had to explain it to me. Justin Hoganson also had to explain it to me. Just tell me, like I'm 5, what this role is, because how do you measure success for what this man is going to do in this position, and also what he's done before? Because he's been at several stops. You worked with him, or at least were around him at Auburn. Tell us why to be excited about this hire.
Well, you know, first I'll just tell you about the person, and then I'll tell you about the position, because I believe, unless I'm wrong, the official position is Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting, correct? Yeah. That's the official title. But I'm going to tell you something about Darren. And, you know, again, we're all fans of somebody. I'm from Auburn. And you know, I have a lot of connections in there. And when Darren was there, yes, it was under Brian Harsin, but make no connections between how it ended and went for Brian Harsin and what Darren Uscher can provide. What I think you're going to get with Darren Uscher, number one, nobody is going to work for as hard as long as this guy, which, you know, a lot of people say that about a lot of people. And if you're going to compete in the Southeastern Conference in anything, let alone football, you got to have somebody that is unbelievably driven. And that's what you have in Darren. But I think the best quality, outside of understanding what he's looking at, is that Darren is really, really organized to a point where, you know, it takes a lot of pressure off other guys. Not that he's doing other guys' jobs, but when you're the director of player personnel and recruiting, while they may be the same title, those are two different things. Right. So director of player personnel, and this is something, Chris, that me and you have talked a ton about in the past, is I don't think people realized one of the key ingredients that made Nick Saban who he was his ability to know how to structure a roster over the long term and the short term. Not saying that Darren Uscher is going to be Nick Saban, but when it comes to being the director of player personnel, you help structure out the roster to where you try not to lose too much from one position group at too many times. What also that involves is an umbrella underneath it. How many scholarships do you have? Right now with the transfer portal, that's a brand new wing that has added another element even to that job. And then you deal with the stuff, the day-to-day with the players, right? You know, the coaches have your director of ops that helps with the coaching staff. The director of player personnel also takes care of things that the players have to do in between academics, in between setting up when they need to be there, where they need to be, understanding what they're doing. And you have to be organized to be able to do that. Director of recruiting, some of that stuff falls over. Darren Usher isn't going to be a guy that says, we need to offer this guy. We don't need to offer this guy. They'll take his input, but what they'll say is, Darren, how does this look? How is our 2026 portfolio looking? And he can be able to say, all right, we have this amount of scholarships. We have this amount of guys that are redshirting, which is going to go here. We lost 3 DBs to the portal, which puts us at this number. You need the guy that can figure out the Rubik's Cube in the taxi on the way to the building. It's straight out of Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith. You got to be able to build the parachute while you're going down. And Darren can hit the ground running in that. And I'm going to tell you this. Anybody that Dan Lanning would hire, right, capacity that he did with Darren Usher, should make you feel 13 flavors of awesome if you're a South Carolina fan. So is Darren Usher a perfect person? No. But he works his butt off. He's incredibly organized, and he knows how this world works. So I think it's a very low-key and great hire for South Carolina. That maybe not a lot of people outside of Columbia are talking about, but he is going to help. Now, you asked, how do you measure that? Well, you measure it like you measure anything, Chris. It's all built into one cog. Are you winning or not? And if they're winning, Darren Usher has had a part in organizing and helping that happen. That's what all these coaches are judged on.
Yeah. Honestly, I think about it, like when I finally started like getting into the like ins and outs of the actual job, and it's funny because I'm looking it up. Like I just Googled it earlier, right? And the first thing that comes up is Boise State's hiring for one, which is where he previously was for 7 years, right? And it was very successful there. They had the #1 ranked recruiting class in the Mountain West Conference for 7 straight years while he was there. But the list of duties and responsibilities goes on and on and on. And I think that the thing when we talk about like the assistant coaches and all the extra like analysts and just people in the building that keeps expanding and expanding in this day and age of college football, like, I think this is probably the area you need it most. Like, I don't need, 2 defensive line coaches, but I probably need like 11 people to be handling like this team mom ordeal when we're having people come in for recruiting visits on a game weekend, and we have this coming up in officials, and you got to make sure like what you said about having the roster intact, and now you have to deal with, hey, who's probably going to be entering the portal, not only from our own team, but from other teams, so we can be like ready to go and throw out offers. The constant juggling of those numbers, it's got to take a very, very special person. You brought this up, and you said don't judge him based off of the association with Harsin. So, like, just full disclosure, when I saw the reaction and I went to look and see his resume and like where's he been, just like learn about the guy. Oregon, first thing that popped up. Obviously, then he had like a very brief stint at UCLA, went back to Oregon. But before that, being at Auburn, and especially with the ties of the job being to recruiting, because that was a staff that if you talk to anybody close to the program, it felt like mainly from the head man and Brian Harsin, that he just did not want to recruit. Yeah. So walk me through like why that's not a deterrent, or like you shouldn't be reading too much into that, because I mean, honestly, man, surface level, you look at that, it feels like a red flag, even though it might not have been anything associated with him.
Well, yeah, the way I would put it like this is, number one, the head coach kind of dictates how everything works, obviously, right? Just like the head of any business or organization. Yeah. But the differences in Brian Harsin and Shane Beamer could not be wider. Shane Beamer understands, number one, the importance of the head coach being, you don't even have to be the best recruiter. You just got to work hard in recruiting, because Nick Saban's the greatest college football coach of all time. He worked harder than maybe any head coach in recruiting. Kirby Smart does the same thing. The real ones realize they carry the biggest stick. At the end of the day, that's the most important in-home. That's the relationship that a player values the most. Just like if I was getting hired by a Fortune 500 company and the CEO calls me, that's different than the branch manager calling me. Right. Not that I don't love the branch manager, not that I know I'm going to be working a lot closer with the branch manager than the CEO, but when the CEO comes to visit me, that carries a little bit more weight. So to me, Brian Harsin, and I appreciate you giving me this platform to tell the truth about Brian Harsin. Like I've said, Brian Harsin at Boise State could get away with not being the greatest head coach recruiter because of what he was going up against. And that's not a knock on everybody in the Mountain West, but it's a whole different jungle in the SEC. Brian Harsin was a house cat. He wanted his milk brought to him. Oh, you should come to Auburn because it's Auburn and I shouldn't have to work hard to recruit you. Meanwhile, Nick Saban's doing the cha-cha slide in somebody's living room as the winningest all-time coach. So I wouldn't hold Darren to the feet of one bad experience with a guy that they had good experience at Boise State, albeit when it was easier. But Shane Beamer and Darren Uscher together should be a perfect mix, man. I'm talking syrup and pancakes, dog. I'm talking icing and cake. Like it should go together really well because they both work really hard. They understand the importance of the head coach being a vibrant recruiter, or at least it's like a great example. Brian Kelly's not the greatest person to go in there and win a living room, but he works hard at it, and you can get away with it. So I think if you're a South Carolina fan, you're like, well, you know, he was with Brian Harsin at Auburn, and we saw how that worked out. That's kind of unfair to Darren because it worked out pretty good at Oregon, right? Yeah. It worked out pretty good where he was, you know, when he had a head coach that wanted to recruit. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I would not judge him based off just that falling out at Auburn with Harsin.
Well, and listen, and if you do want to, make sure that you include the numbers with it, because even so, like everything, the negative things we've said attached to Harsin in the 2 years while he was at Auburn, they still finished with 2 top 25 recruiting classes both years, which like when you really think about like the friction that was going on inside that program, especially from Harsin, that's a pretty remarkable job. I will say this, the other thing, and then we'll get you out of here, like the thing I think is most overlooked about this, and it's something that I've loved seeing in college football, and especially in the SEC over the past couple of years, when it happens, feels like there's something like a little bit more special, and like there's like more at stake, and there's more passion and like fire brought to the job when you have a little bit of like, you know, like you have more invested into it because he's an alumni of USC.
Oh yeah,
like Coach O is the perfect example. I always say like. He wanted to be the coach at LSU since he was a kid. And I don't know if this is exactly what Darren Uscher wanted to do since he was, you know, a kid. But at the same time, like coming from this place and going to school for 4 years, like learning how to do the current job you have right now in the same school and building and all that kind of stuff, that feels like a very good opportunity. Yeah. And like it's kind of what Shane Beamer has been trying to build, this entire idea of like welcome home, and like this is like we have all we need inside. All we need is what's inside this building. And I think that like this like younger and vibrant energy, I feel like in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to start hearing like the GMs and like the personnel directors and recruiting coordinators, all that. Those are going to be like, I don't think paid the same as coordinators, but they are going to be talked about in almost as important of a way. I think just the way the portal and everything has changed college football.
Without a doubt. I mean, you've added another huge branch to the organization, and it is the lifeblood of the organization. Right. You are only as good as the players. Like a business is only as good as the employees. Now, your point about being an alum, right? Look, it's different when mama calls. Yeah. Like when mama calls, you answer. Like you may have your girlfriend may call. Right. You may have friends that call and you're like, oh, I'll call them back later. Mama calls most of the time. You're going to answer. You know, I always say when it comes to coaching or playing at a place that, you know, you grew up at or that you went to, there's a reason people look straight at their parents after they hit a home run. You know, right. you want to do the best for the place that you love that gave you the opportunity to do what you love. So again, I think we do got to make sure, though, it's kind of the perfect mix because you have guys that bringing a guy back home is great, right? It makes them work even harder. But when you have a guy that's as smart and as capable as Darren Uscher, and then you blend that with working at his alma mater, a place that he loves, that's how you get the super sane version of who you hired. That's like the only Dragon Ball Z thing I know. Sorry. But like that's the only way you get that.
Yeah. That's one more Dragon Ball Z saying than I know. So that's great.
That's shocking. I thought you'd at least have 2.
Absolutely not. No. Dude, I appreciate you joining us. I'm glad you're doing well and back from vacation, back to work. Tell everyone where they can find your stuff, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Definitely, Chris. Again, congrats on the gig. I hope South Carolina fans know how lucky they are. Yeah, look, we talk a ton of college football, a ton of college sports, and everything else. We have live call-ins, a live chat. It's Crain & Company. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically anywhere. We go live from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Central. If you can't catch us live, it's going to stay on here until the aliens decide they've had enough fun watching this ant farm. So appreciate it, Chris, as always, buddy.
Of course, dude. You have a good one. All right. That was our good buddy Jake Crain helping us out and give us a little bit behind the scenes look at the new hire for USC and somebody he knows personally. So we appreciate him for that. So listen, that is all for segment 1. I will tell you in the next segment, make sure you stick around. We are going to talk about the current status of Gamecock recruiting, where it needs to be, where they need to go to get better, and also why copying Rutgers of all schools might be the answer to go take the next step for South Carolina. That is up next in the second segment here. But first, guys, listen, I am obviously super pumped for football season. We got about 54 days left, but there's still plenty of other activities in Columbia and South Carolina. Plenty of events to be going to. I talked about the Creed concert. There's a huge soccer match coming to the stadium in early August. A ton of stuff. Or if you just want to get ahead of the game and go ahead and get your tickets for the opener against Old Dominion. That line is updated today from Vegas. It's South Carolina is a 20.5-point favorite. If you're just itching to make sure you have your tickets in hand, make sure you use the Game Time app. Our good friends there. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. All-in pricing shows the total cost up front. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Make sure you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code. The dogs say hey, $20 off your first purchase. Make sure you use the Game Time app. All right, welcome back in, guys. Listen, before we get started on the next segment, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day, every day on your TV and constantly have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, all the above, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, guys. So a lot of the talk today in this episode has been about recruiting, which makes sense. It's the lifeblood of college football. And really the biggest key to winning. It's you hear it all the time. It's Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's anymore. And with the news of a new hire to be in the role of director of recruiting and player personnel, I think it makes sense to really kind of dive into some of these numbers and like where the expectation should be, not just for South Carolina, but specifically for Shane Beamer in recruiting. And what are what are the draws to come to South Carolina, and what's also maybe working against the Gamecocks as well? So getting into this is what I always want to look at is you look at the state of South Carolina is where I start. Like it's an uphill battle from the beginning because most schools, you want to have school pride. You want to lock up the state. You want to put a fence around your own state and get as many of those guys as possible. But traditionally and historically speaking, the state of South Carolina does not produce a ton of elite blue chip talent. If you look at the numbers, I mean, you had a 5-year stretch from 2010 to 2014 where you had 52 total 4- or 5-star players. 5 years, 52 total. Since that time, you've had far less in the next decade plus. So twice the amount of years and almost 10, double digits less. I think it's right around 40. In most cases, you don't have more than 5. Sometimes you see 6, but usually it's between 3 and 5 4-stars. Sometimes you get a 5-star. And South Carolina's done a good job of capitalizing in those years. When Jordan Birch, I know, ended up being a transfer and kind of utilizing that pipeline at Hammond. But in some of those years, they have been able to capitalize on keeping those kids in state, especially when Clemson started to kind of do a more national footprint and not really prioritize that. The thing that I keep looking at is this, though. I want Beamer to have success here. You might hear rival fans or other people and just pessimists in general say that he's cringy, they can't stand, blah, blah. He's a good recruiter. He might not be Nick Saban or Kirby Smart, but he's a good recruiter. And the thing that you need more than that at this point in this day and age of the NIL era and where college football is you got to have some bells and whistles, man. You got to have facilities and you got to have a budget. And when you look at the numbers, they did a story on this last year. So this is from the 2023 cycle. and just breaking down the actual recruiting budget for every team in the SEC. And South Carolina they came in 10th, which is, not bad. The budget was $1.1 million. By the way, that's up by almost 50% from what it was in the previous 5 years combined, right? So like they are doing the things they need to do to try and compete. They are getting like boosters and like making sure they have deep pockets and people that are going to invest into this program and invest in the future of this program. And in this stage of football, like you kind of have to. The collectives, that NIL dream that kids were going to be like, oh, I can be in commercials and finally make money off my jersey sales. Nope. That took about 12 seconds until everyone was like, you know what we're going to do here, right? We're just going to collect as much money as possible, and then we're just going to disperse it. Yeah, just like, a salary cap and then an actual NFL team. But I say that because to compete nowadays, and you will start seeing some of these like dormant, bigger, maybe former blue blood type programs that are hungry to win and have deep pockets. The playing field's going to be level with those types of places. Look at Texas, Miami, Tennessee. Those are teams that are going to compete for recruits because they are going to spend a lot of money. So if you look at the budget and you look at what South Carolina is doing, it's $1.1 million. Like I said, it's 10th in the SEC. It's only ahead of Mississippi State, Kentucky, and LSU, right? That's not as big of a concern. I think you could probably increase there. I think you could probably get, a little bit more money. And probably since these numbers are from 2 years ago, you probably will see that number increase a little bit. You look at the top of that list, no surprise who it is. It's Georgia, spending over $1.2 million more than any other team in the conference, $4.2 million in recruiting. Hard to argue against it because it's working. But like going back to what you do have, like what do you have to bring kids here? Because I think what we are starting to see at South Carolina, something we haven't really seen in the past, is they're starting to get a little bit more of like a likability and a draw ability. And it started with Spencer Rattler. You get in a guy like Nick Harbor, who I feel like I'm going to just have a love fest every single day on the show about. But like being able to get kids to come into Columbia and want to stay, especially in the portal era, that's key. So how do you do that? You invest in the recruiting budget and you invest in facilities. And the budget may be low. It's 10th in the SEC. The facilities are top 10 nationally. And that is something that I think works in a huge advantage for South Carolina. You talk about just like the recent investment into that, right? The Cindy and Ken Long Football Operations Center, top 10 nationally. It's 110,000 square feet. They spent $50 million on it. It's from 247 Sports. It said it's the 6th best in the SEC, and it's beautiful. Like it's beautiful. And kids want to go to a place that has those kind of amenities. I will say this: when you go back to the budget and you say it's $1.1 million for the budget, just for the recruiting budget, that's not bad. However, when you look at the top 5 teams in the conference, they're all more than double that. So I think if you're looking at where the program needs to go, because you look at the numbers that Shane Beamer has had recruiting, it's not been bad necessarily. We shouldn't count the first year because that was ridiculous. It came in an impossible situation. They finished 14th in the SEC and 75th nationally. Since then, he finished 13th, 7th, 10th, and he's currently 12th in the SEC in their recruiting rankings. Nationally, he finished 27th, 16th, 19th, and 28th. The thing that jumped out to me the most is like in the SEC, you could finish top 30, right? Like you'll have a top 30 class and still be 14th out of 16 teams because it's just so competitive in this league. Now, I like what Beamer's done so far, and you hear the numbers in the SEC. It's like 13th, 10th, 12th. That's not great, but you're still top 30 every single year, finishing top 22 of those years. How do you take the next step? You probably need to take a page out of Will Muschamp's book because that's a time where they weren't great and well coached, but they finished with a top 20 class almost every single year. In the 10 years prior to Shane Beamer being hired, South Carolina finished with a top 10 or top 20 class 8 of those 10 years. And that's, I think, where you need to live if you're South Carolina moving forward. And it doesn't seem like it's that big of a drop off, but you look at some of the schools that are outside of that number, like on the outside of 20, on the high side of 20 or 25. Yeah, as of 2 days ago, they were ranked 28th. Here's some of the teams that finished 28th in the nation recruiting in the last couple of years: California, Cal, Arizona, Texas Tech, NC State. You want to kind of look at yourself as South Carolina and think that you're a better and more desirable program than all four of those. You don't want to be having seasons like Cal. No, not at all. So like I said, like the number may not seem that drastically different, but if you're Shane Beamer and the staff, I think you got to set the line at no higher than 22 or 23rd, and you want to be in the top 20 nationally, because the teams that finish consistently in that top 20, those are the teams that are competing for conference championships, playoff spots, 8, 9, 10 win seasons consistently every year. It's just the way this game is played now. It is so much more Jimmys and Joes than X's and O's. So you have to live in that world. I will tell you the thing, if I'm Shane Beamer, what I would do, and I'm looking for a blueprint to copy with the current budget you have, and how do you make this work? Because you're not going to spend $4.2 million like Georgia is. You're just not. So how do you compete and do it on a budget? I think you copy and take a page out of the playbook of not Bama, not Ohio State, not Texas, not Georgia. Copy Rutgers. And that may sound ridiculous because it is. It's probably the only time Rutgers has ever been referenced on this podcast. But copy the blueprint of what Rutgers has done with their recruiting. And I think that's what South Carolina should mirror and model moving forward. And now hear me out. Rutgers is not a good football program, okay? But when you look at the investment they've made in recruiting, a few years back from 2017 to 2022, they were spending an average of $879,000 a year. Pretty normal stuff, right? Rutgers, who's just a basement dweller in the Big Ten, when these numbers came out, I was shocked to see Rutgers had the second highest budget of any team in the Big Ten, only behind Michigan. They almost doubled their salary from the 2022 5-year stretch to 2023. They are spending over $1.6 million a year now. So if you're South Carolina and you think, could you get another $500,000 into the budget? Would it work? Should Rutgers be spending $1.6 million in this economy? Probably not. But then you look at the numbers. Since they started doing it, they finished 57th nationally in recruiting 3 years ago. Last year, it was 33rd. And I don't know if you guys have kept up with this or not, but Rutgers is currently 12th in the country for their national recruiting ranking. So I never thought I would say this. I didn't think I'd hear anyone ever say this when it comes to football or, honestly, any sports or academics. Copy what Rutgers is doing if you're South Carolina and elevate a little bit more of that recruiting thing, because it obviously still works. So there you go. Listen, we will close the show after this break. We have some updates about SEC Media Days, and we have some cringe, just absolute cringe, coming out of Clemson and their fans per usual. We will get back to that when we return. All right, guys, welcome back to Locked On Gamecocks, your daily show for all things South Carolina sports. And we close the show today with some just ho-hum news. The announcement was made yesterday what 3 players would be joining Shane Beamer in Dallas for SEC Media Days next week. Gave me all the FOMO. It'll be the first time I'm not going in quite some time because I chose to go to a wedding in Tahoe, which was worth it in case my girlfriend's watching. But it should be a great time out in Dallas for the first time as well, now that Texas is in the league. The 3 student athletes and football players that Shane Beamer is going to be bringing with him: Luke Doty, Alex Huntley, and Debo Williams. Love it. I tell you what, last year, I really, really enjoyed the very small time I had with Tonka Hemingway. Incredibly well-spoken, had a blast with him, had a blast with Spencer Rattler as well. But one of the best parts about Media Days in general is when you bring the players into the big room, they kind of go off into these 3 separate corners. And obviously Spencer Rattler was going to get a majority of the people, hounding him for questions. There was no one at Tonka Hemingway's table. And we sat there for about 2 or 3 minutes talking about who had the best barbecue in the city. And he disagreed with me that it was Palmetto Pig. But I wish that Tonka Hemingway was going back because he was awesome. But nevertheless, great group of 3 guys here. Should be a lot of fun. Luke Doty, redshirt senior, just a jack of all trades, I guess, at this point. Kid from Myrtle Beach, who's a quarterback, now also a receiver. I think he played a little bit tight end last year as well. Should be a lot of fun. Nothing will compare to Beamer going the first year with Nick Muse and recreating this Steve Spurrier picture. That was fantastic. But I can't wait to see what they have up their sleeve, because there's always some sort of social media thing that Beamer decides to pull off the day of their event at SC Media Days. Some people think he's cringe. Some people think Shane Beamer's cringe. That's fine. I tell you what, no matter how goofy or golly gee Shane Beamer can be, he's nowhere near and never will be near the level of cringe of not just Dabo, but Clemson fans in general. The gift that keeps on giving, it will never not amaze me that Clemson fans act the way they do and are absolutely serious. Like, this is not a joke. This is not, this is like, listen, Clemson is just if Texas A&M was Southern Baptist. That's it. That's it. A little bit more conservative. Probably not going to go outside and they're all white overalls, but nevertheless, still pretty cultish and super weird. Our good friends at Message Board Geniuses, who do a great job, great podcast as well. Make sure you check that out. They posted this the other day, and it said on Twitter, said hashtag Clemson football can be mediocre as long as it remains a beacon on a hill. And they got this post from TigerNet, which I'm assuming is just the message board where all these people hang out. So he says, the title of the post, honestly, I've gotten to the point where I'd rather lose with Swinney. Hell of a start. Hell of a start. You know what I love more than anything, especially when you're doubling down and just really digging your heels in on this, not willing to be a part of this new era of college football, and not only not being a part of it, not having success by not being a part of it, going further and further away from how good you used to be, and all the while making fun of what everyone else is doing and using like little puns and dumb crap that Dabo spews every time he's in front of a microphone. Like, this downfall, it's been slow, but it's been hilarious to watch. Hilarious to watch. He says, I would rather lose with Swinney or someone like him than win without him. I'm not saying I blame the kids for wanting to cash in. I'd be hard pressed to persuade the 18-year-old version of myself not to do the same thing. But if Clemson football falls back into mediocrity from a win-loss standpoint, and yet remains a beacon on a hill from a priorities and integrity standpoint, I'd be okay with it. Give me 85 guys who see playing for Clemson as a privilege instead of a quick payday. I'll pull for them all day, win or lose. I tell you what, when this guy got out of his time machine in 1978 and wrote this, I'm sure it meant something to him. Like, I get that of course you want all the players to love your school. You make it hard to love. You make it really hard to love. You guys are super weird. Super, super weird. It is the only facility that an elite program that put in a slide. Like, just everything y'all do, just try not to be weird for a day challenge. But I love the fact that he said if it remains a beacon on a hill. Clemson is a beacon on a hill. Clemson, just the Harvard of Anderson, South Carolina. No one has ever said that. You are Auburn with a lake. Get off your high horse. It's unbelievable. That is the end of the show. We will try to end with more Clemson slander on a consistent basis. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for Jake for coming on as well. Make sure you try Locked On as they've launched our first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the Fire TV channels app. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.